Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Inconvenient History. This YouTube channel is dedicated to teaching the history that teaching U.S. history, that is, that the Democrat Party finds incredibly inconvenient and that the left finds inconvenient, whether it's the actual history of the Democrat Party itself or its history of the United States in general, that the left just finds incredibly inconvenient and the Democrat Party finds inconvenient as well because it's counter to the narrative that they like to push, that this country is a horribly racist nation. It was founded to preserve slavery, which just could not be further from the truth. So I want to produce videos that teach true history and what actually happened many years ago. So that's what we're doing with this channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about Thomas Jefferson. Was he a racist? He did own slaves. He owned a lot of slaves too, all the way up until his death. But is there more to Thomas Jefferson's story than simply being a slave owner? Is there more to it? The left doesn't think so. The left simply says, slave owner, racist. And that's all. That's the only analysis that they ever do. There's so much more to that, and we're going to get into it right now. Before we move on, I want to encourage everyone to hit that like button, hit subscribe button, and notification bell. I want to post new videos as often as I can. As fast as I can read new history, I'll get new videos up on this channel, and I promise with new topics every single time. All right, so moving on to the actual topic at hand, Thomas Jefferson. The left says he was a racist. Canceled. I'm pretty sure they removed some statues of him and renamed buildings that were named after him, and just trying to remove his likeness in any way, shape, or form, because they say he was a racist, horrible human being. And while he did own slaves, and that's not a good thing, I'm certainly not excusing that at all, because it was a horrible thing that he did by owning slaves. However, there's much more to the story than that, and I want to direct you to this book right here, The Lives of the Signers of the Declaration of Independence. I got this book off of wallbuilders.com. Wallbuilders is an organization that is a nonprofit that teaches forgotten American history, and they have a lot of books and a lot of resources that they use to teach us forgotten history, and this is one of the books they have on their website. This is actually a reprint of an 1848 textbook that they're selling, so it's not authored by them, but back in 1848. So on top of having just a brief biography of all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, there's actually something else in here that is incredibly important to the story of Thomas Jefferson, and that is a copy of his original draft of the Declaration. For those who don't know, Thomas Jefferson wrote the original draft of the Declaration. There was a committee of 5 people from those members of the Continental Congress. There was 5 chosen to be on a subcommittee to create the actual declaration that could be brought to the entire Continental Congress for debate. And he's the one in that committee of 5 people. He was the one that actually wrote the original draft. And then from there, the committee of 5 debated his original draft. And then it went to the Continental Congress, the entire Continental Congress, to be debated till we got to the final copy that was actually signed by all the members of the Continental Congress. So, there was a lot of edits that were made to his original draft, but there's one edit in particular that is very important. In the draft that we see today, the one that was signed by all the members of the Congress, there are 27 grievances and 27 reasons why we did not want to be a part of Great Britain anymore, what made us so mad to say, you know what, we want to be our own nation. So there's 27 grievances. But Thomas Jefferson's original draft, there were 28 grievances, and that 28th grievance was struck out of the Declaration of Independence. It was not substituted in any way, shape, or form. It was just simply removed, and that's it. And I want to read that 28th grievance to you, because that is what's so important to really, put another piece to the whole history of Thomas Jefferson, and really might make you start thinking about, really, was he a racist? So let's start here. I'm going to read out the whole thing. It's not terribly long, but I will read out the whole thing in its entirety. He, being King George, he has waged civil war against human nature itself, violating the most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who have never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This tyrannical warfare, the opium of infidel powers, is the warfare of a Christian king of Great Britain, determined to keep open a market where men, I stress men because he stressed it, he capitalized every letter in the word men when referring to the slaves. To keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce, pretty much deplorable, horrible commerce, and that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people upon whom he obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. And that was his 28th grievance. That is a very strong public stance against slavery. Not only is he, it's a public stance against slavery itself, he's denouncing the whole practice, the whole institution of slavery. He's actually condemning the King of Great Britain, King George III, for his stance on slavery and his approval of slavery. And he's doing it in an extremely public way. He wrote it in the Declaration of Independence. If it was up to him, this 28th grievance would have been included in the Declaration of Independence. It would have been distributed all throughout the 13 colonies, making his stance on slavery known through the entire nation. And it would have been transported overseas, obviously, to Great Britain, because that's who we sent it to. But I'm sure, no doubt, it would have made its way, and word of this grievance would have made its way, at the very least, to other European nations. So he was doing it in a very public way that would have been, quite frankly, international, where he's taking this stance against slavery. So that's one point I want to point out, is how he was willing to take this public stance like this. Also, this grievance, excuse me, this grievance by word count is the longest grievance that he wrote. So he had the most to say about slavery. There were 27 other grievances. They were all very, very short relative to this. Excuse me. This is the longest grievance by word count. So he had the most to say. And when he had the most to say about slavery is when he was denouncing the very institution. So that's another point I want to make. Also, I stressed it when I was reading, and I pointed out while I was reading it. But I'll say it again. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. Men. He actually capitalized the entire word men. M-E-N, capital M, capital E, capital N, when referring to slaves. The left likes to say, oh, Thomas Jefferson was racist, right? And a common argument that the right will make was, well, he wrote all men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence. Well, he didn't mean all men, because he was a racist, so clearly he meant white men. Even though that's not what he wrote, clearly that's what he meant, right? That's what the left likes to say. Well, no, here's proof that what he actually wrote is what he meant. When he meant all men are created equal, he actually meant all men. And you can see it right here in the 28th grievance, where he referred to the slaves as men. And another thing I want to point out by the word men, when he capitalized it, had the 28th grievance been left in the Declaration of Independence, that would have been the only word out of the entire Declaration of Independence, this most historical document. The only word that would have been capitalized would have been men. That's the only word that he wanted to stress. Of everything else he wanted to say, and he had a lot to say. A lot of great points, a lot of grievances, a lot of reasons why we wanted to leave Great Britain. That's the only word that he wanted to stress, was men. That's another point. So, also, too, want to stress, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this, I had a tough time saying the word before, so I'll try it again, execrable commerce. Horrible, basically, commerce is what that means. Suppressing every legislative attempt. What a lot of people don't know is going all the way back to 1774, colonies started to ban slavery within their own borders. Pennsylvania, I believe, was the first in 1774. Other colonies began to follow suit. King George got word of it and said, nope, you're a part of Great Britain. We are a slaveholding nation, and he nullified the laws. So just completely did away with them. So that's what Thomas Jefferson is referring to there. So Thomas Jefferson took issue with that King George stepped in and prevented the colonies from one by one from abolishing slavery within their own colonial borders. He took issue with that, so much so that he wanted to include that in the Declaration of Independence. I want to point that out too. The left likes to say that we were founded on slavery and founded to preserve slavery. Nothing could be further from the truth. Trust me, nothing could be further from the truth. It's actually the complete opposite. And really, in this case, we were trying to end slavery within our colonial borders. And King George said, no, you can't do it. And at that point actually made it into Thomas Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration. Now, why did this grievance get removed from the Declaration? Because two colonies, South Carolina and Georgia, did not agree. Once the Thomas Jefferson's copy, his draft, made it to the entire Continental Congress for debate, the 28th grievance was still in there, but two colonies did not agree, Georgia and South Carolina, and it was agreed upon, I want to say before the drafting of the Declaration, if not maybe sometime during the drafting of the Declaration, that all the delegates would unanimously agree on all the grievances within the Declaration to help promote strength and unity amongst all the colonies. So that's why just two colonies objecting to this one grievance was enough to get it kicked out and thrown out of the entire Declaration of Independence. So that's why it was kicked out. But I do want to note some colonies which ended up becoming the part of the Confederate States of America nearly 100 years later, did not object, such as Virginia. Virginia delegation, all the delegates that represented Virginia in the Continental Congress agreed to this grievance. Obviously, Thomas Jefferson did; he wrote it, but all the other delegates did as well. So I wanted to point that out. It's kind of historically ironic, I suppose. That's one point I wanted to make about Thomas Jefferson, about his past really not being so clear as the left likes to make it seem. So if he was such a racist, why would he include this 28th grievance? Why would he refer to slaves as men? Why would he capitalize the word men to really stress it? Like, these are human beings. They're not property. They're not cattle. They're not anything. They're human beings. They are men. And why was he so upset with the king with regards to nullifying laws prohibiting slavery within colonial borders, so much so that he included it in the 28th grievance? And why did he have so much to say about taking a stance against slavery, with it being the largest by word count? And why was he prepared to make such a public, really international claim denouncing the practice of slavery, doing so within the Declaration of Independence? Why was he willing to do that if he was such a racist, right? The other point I want to make is, it's not found in this book, but I picked up in a video from Wall Builders. They have a YouTube channel as well. I picked up from a video of Wall Builders. In 1807, when Thomas Jefferson was the president of the United States, he signed a law banning the international slave trade. I want to say that law took effect January 1st, 1808, but he signed it in 1807. So when he signed that law and we officially banned the international slave trade, the United States, one, became the first nation ever in the world to ban the international slave trade. We were number one. The left doesn't like to talk about that because it is inconvenient history to their narrative of the country, the United States, being the most horrible racist nation on the face of the planet. But we were the first to ban the international slave trade. And Thomas Jefferson was the one to sign that bill into law after it passed Congress. So if he was such a racist, why would he sign a bill? Why would he affix his signature to a bill that banned and completely stopped the international slave trade in the United States? Just completely removed the United States from participating in that trade, transatlantic trade practice. So who knows? Doesn't sound like a racist to me. But to be fair, he still did own slaves, even though he signed that bill, making it a law that we can no longer participate in the international slave trade, that it would be illegal to do so. He still owned slaves. Despite the fact that he wrote the 28th grievance, and despite the fact he referred to slaves as men, he still owned slaves. So I want to point that out there. I want to be fair about this. But I do want to point out these other facts that the left does not like to point out, that the Democrat Party does not like to point out, because it is counter to their narrative. But I want people to think, is there just more to the story about Thomas Jefferson? Is it as clear-cut as the left likes to make it seem, where they say slaveholder, racist? Or is there a lot more to the story than that? I submit that there is a lot more to the story than that. Those are just two examples that I gave with regards to that 28th grievance in the Declaration of Independence, and the fact that he was willing to sign a bill into law that made the international slave trade illegal in the United States. So that's all I got for everybody. Next video, what we're going to talk about is the Civil Rights Movement. We'll talk a little bit about the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, the mid-1960s. We're all probably familiar with that. However, there was a much more profound civil rights movement that occurred between the years of 1865 and 1875. The left doesn't like to talk about it because it is inconvenient history to them. But we're going to talk about it in the next video. So come back, check that out. I want to get that video up as soon as possible. And we're going to learn something about the civil rights movement, both the one that occurred the 10 years following the Civil War, and we'll talk a little bit about the one that occurred in the mid-1960s. There's a fact about the one in the mid-1960s that the left finds incredibly inconvenient, and they don't like to talk about. So we're going to talk about it. All right, that's all I got for everyone. Hit that like button, hit subscribe button, notification bell. I post new videos as often as I can. If you want a copy of this book, I'll post a link to it on the Wall Builders website. You can check it out, and I highly recommend this book. It's a great book. So thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.